Have you ever felt like God places someone directly in your path at the exact moment you can no longer carry the weight alone? Daniel had everything society teaches a man to chase: financial success, respect, influence, a name that opened doors without knocking. Yet none of that mattered anymore, because just hours earlier, he had buried the only person who had ever loved him without conditions. He drove aimlessly through the streets of San Antonio, Texas, the city where he had built his career and his empire, but which now felt foreign, hollow, and unbearably loud. The steering wheel felt cold under his trembling hands, not from fear, but from the absence that pressed against his chest with every breath. His mother was gone, and with her, the last place where his heart had ever felt safe. 3 hours had passed since the funeral ended, but time had lost its meaning. Grief does that. It stretches minutes into eternities and collapses entire years into a single suffocating moment. The condolences from colleagues and distant relatives echoed in his mind like empty phrases, well-intentioned but powerless. Words had failed him. Success had failed him. Even faith, something his mother had carried like oxygen, now felt distant and unanswered. He didn't know where he was going until he suddenly wasn't moving at all. A voice stopped him. Soft, fragile, human. It wasn't loud enough to demand attention, yet it carried something far heavier than volume. Hope. The kind that doesn't shout but survives quietly. The kind that speaks to wounds that haven't healed. Daniel pulled over without thinking, as if his body had decided for him. He stepped out of his black SUV and realized he was standing beside a small plaza he had never noticed before, despite having driven these streets for years. Iron benches painted dark green, tall trees offering tired shade, a calm that sharply contrasted the storm raging inside him. He sat down heavily, as though his legs could no longer carry the grief alone. His tailored grey suit was immaculate. His gold watch caught the afternoon sun. From the outside, he looked like a man in control. Inside, he felt like a building moments away from collapse. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, burying his face in his hands, trying and failing to stop the tears he had been holding back since dawn. His mother's face appeared in his mind, just as it had 3 days earlier in the hospital. Frail fingers wrapped around his hand, her voice weak but steady, telling him God had a beautiful plan for his life, that one day he would find a woman who loved him for who he truly was. At the time, he hadn't understood. Now, the memory felt cruel. What kind of plan leaves a man orphaned at 34? What purpose could exist in building everything, only to have no one left to share it with? Anger mixed with sorrow inside his chest, thick and suffocating. For the first time in his life, Daniel wondered if the faith his mother had lived by so fiercely had been worth it at all. And then the voice returned. A young woman sat beneath an oak tree on the far side of the plaza, eyes closed, a worn acoustic guitar resting against her body like an extension of herself. Her dress was simple, light brown, moving gently with the breeze. Long dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders as she sang, unaware or unconcerned of who might be listening. She wasn't perfect, her voice cracked slightly in places. There was no polished performance, no corporate stage, no artificial confidence, but it had soul. Each lyric spoke of trust, of walking through darkness without being abandoned, of God remaining present even when everything else falls apart. Daniel lifted his head slowly, drawn toward her like someone reaching for air after being underwater too long. Tears slipped freely down his face now, no longer resisted. Every word felt uncomfortably personal, as if the song had been written for him alone. Even when you walk through the deepest valley, do not be afraid, for he walks with you. He didn't know if he believed that anymore. He wasn't sure God was still listening. But something inside him wanted to believe again. For the first time since receiving the call about his mother, his lungs expanded fully, a deeper breath, a fragile relief. When the song ended, the young woman opened her eyes. Across the plaza, their gazes met. The moment stretched, silent and heavy with something neither of them could name. She didn't look away. Neither did he. There was no pity in her eyes, no curiosity about his wealth or his appearance, only recognition, as if she saw the weight he carried without needing him to explain it. She offered a small, genuine smile. And just like that, Daniel felt something shift. He didn't know it yet, but that quiet plaza, that imperfect song, and that stranger with a guitar were about to change the course of his life forever. Daniel didn't leave the plaza right away. He sat there long after the song ended, pretending to check his phone, adjusting his jacket, finding excuses to stay without admitting to himself that he didn't want the moment to end. Grief has a strange way of making silence unbearable, yet for the first time that day, silence felt different, softer, less hostile, as if the air itself had decided to stop attacking him. Hannah adjusted the guitar strap on her shoulder and placed the instrument carefully inside a worn fabric case. Her movements were slow, almost meditative, like someone used to being alone with her thoughts. She stood up, brushed dust from her dress, and only then walked toward the fountain at the center of the plaza. Daniel watched without staring, a skill learned from years of observing people in boardrooms without revealing intention. Still, something about her felt disarming. She didn't perform for attention. She didn't scan the plaza for approval or spare change. She simply existed, as if the act of singing was not a transaction, but a necessity. When she passed near him, she stopped. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Her voice, now without melody, was softer than he expected. There was no dramatic concern in her tone, no urgency, just a simple human question, offered without pressure. Daniel hesitated. Years of discipline had trained him to answer everything with certainty, to never expose weakness. But grief strips away rehearsed responses. It leaves only truth. "I'm not sure," he said. It was the most honest sentence he had spoken all day. She nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. "I come here when I don't know either," she replied. "This place doesn't ask questions." He looked around, taking in the trees, the benches, the slow movement of people passing through without noticing one another. For the first time, he saw the plaza not as a random stop, but as a refuge. "My name is Hannah," she added. "Daniel." No last names, no titles, no context. Just two people sharing a moment they didn't fully understand. She hesitated for a second, then gestured toward the bench across from him. "Do you mind if I sit?" He shook his head. They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward because neither person is trying to fill it. The fountain murmured behind them. Somewhere nearby, a bus hissed as it pulled away. Life continued, indifferent yet persistent. "I heard your song was," Daniel said eventually. It felt personal. She smiled faintly, looking down at her hands. "It usually does. I think people only hear what they're already carrying." That stayed with him. They talked a little. Not about his job, not about her past, just fragments, the weather. How strange the city can feel even when you've lived in it for years. How music sometimes says what words can't. When they parted, there was no promise to meet again. No exchange of numbers. Just a quiet nod, as if both understood that forcing meaning onto the moment might break it. Yet the next day, Daniel found himself driving back to the plaza without realizing he had made the decision. He told himself it was coincidence, habit, curiosity. But when he saw Hannah sitting beneath the same oak tree, guitar resting against her knee, something inside him loosened. This became their unspoken routine. Some days she sang, some days she didn't. Some days they spoke more. Other days they shared only silence. Daniel never mentioned his wealth. Hannah never asked. The absence of expectation became the foundation of their connection. Over time, he noticed details. How she hummed quietly while tuning her guitar. How her brow furrowed when she concentrated on a difficult chord. How her laughter, rare and sudden, felt entirely unguarded. She noticed things too. The way his shoulders always tensed before he sat down. The way he exhaled deeply when the first song began, as if releasing something he'd been holding for years. One afternoon, as clouds gathered low and heavy, Hannah spoke without looking at him. "You lost someone." It wasn't a question. Daniel swallowed. The words lodged in his throat before finally emerging. "My mother." She nodded, still not turning toward him. "I'm sorry." That was all she said. No platitudes, no explanations, just acknowledgement. For reasons he couldn't explain, that was enough. Days turned into weeks. Daniel began arriving earlier, leaving later. The plaza became the one place where he didn't feel the need to perform. His phone buzzed constantly with meetings, deadlines, expectations. He ignored most of them. Success could wait. Grief could not. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in muted golds and blues, Hannah spoke again. "I sing because it reminds me that pain doesn't get the final word," she said. "Even when it feels like it does." Daniel listened carefully. not as a businessman analyzing risk, but as a man starving for meaning. He realized then that something was changing. The weight in his chest didn't disappear. Grief doesn't vanish so easily. But it shifted. It made room for something else. A fragile sense of connection. A quiet anticipation. A reason to look forward to tomorrow without guilt. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like healing begins in the most unexpected places, this is your reminder that sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest transformations. And if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing to the channel. You're not alone in what you feel, and there's space here for stories that go deeper than the surface. Daniel didn't realize it yet, but what he was building with Hannah wasn't just companionship, it was trust. And trust, once formed, has a way of demanding truth. The truth rarely arrives all at once. It reveals itself in fragments, slipping through quiet moments, lingering pauses, and words that almost remain unspoken. Daniel learned this as the weeks passed, as the space between him and Hannah slowly filled with something deeper than familiarity. It happened one evening when the plaza was nearly empty. The sky hung low, heavy with the promise of rain, and the air smelled like damp concrete and distant storms. Hannah hadn't brought her guitar that day. She sat on the bench beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes tracing patterns on the ground, as if following thoughts too fragile to look at directly. Daniel noticed immediately. "You didn't sing today," he said. She nodded. "Some days, I listen instead." "To what?" "To what hurts." He didn't push. He had learned by now that silence was often her way of trusting him enough to stay. Minutes passed. The first drops of rain tapped against the leaves overhead. The plaza lights flickered on, casting long shadows that stretched and blurred. "My mom used to bring me to places like this," Daniel said suddenly, surprising even himself. "She said God speaks more clearly when you're not rushing." Hannah looked at him then. "She sounds wise." "She was," he replied. "Too wise for this world, maybe." The rain began to fall harder, steady and unrelenting. Neither of them moved. "I was angry at God when she died," Daniel continued. "Still am sometimes. I built everything I thought would protect me from loss, and it didn't matter." Hannah listened without interruption. She always did. "I think faith isn't about never being angry," she said softly. "I think it's about choosing not to walk away, even when you don't understand." Daniel let that settle. Faith, for him, had always been inherited, something he respected but never examined. Now, stripped of certainty, it felt unfamiliar and raw. The next revelation came days later. They were walking through a nearby street market, the kind filled with mismatched stalls and handmade signs. Daniel had insisted on buying her dinner, though she resisted at first. They settled on a small food truck with faded paint and plastic chairs that wobbled when you leaned too far back. As they ate, Hannah stared at her food, appetite absent. "Do you ever feel like your body betrays you?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked at her confused. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the plastic fork. "I get tired easily," she said. "Some days I can barely stand for more than an hour. Singing helps me forget, but it doesn't make it go away." A warning bell rang somewhere deep in his chest. "Have you seen a doctor?" She nodded. "A few." "And?" "They say it's manageable," she replied quickly. Too quickly. "I just need to be careful." Daniel wanted to press further, but something in her posture told him not to. Not yet. Trust, he realized, unfolds at its own pace. As time went on, the contrast between their lives became impossible to ignore. Daniel's world was one of contracts, negotiations, and numbers so large they no longer felt real. Hannah's world existed day to day, shaped by bus schedules, street performances, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. Yet neither looked at the other with envy. If anything, they seemed to borrow strength from what the other lacked. One afternoon, Daniel finally told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. "I develop properties," he said, staring straight ahead. "Apartment complexes, office buildings." She nodded slowly. "That sounds big." "It's exhausting," he admitted. "And lonely." She smiled at that, not dismissively, but knowingly. Loneliness doesn't care how impressive your life looks. That night, alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Daniel realized how empty his success felt without someone to share the silence with. The rooms echoed with absence. He missed the plaza. He missed the sound of Hannah's voice drifting through the air, imperfect and honest. The following week, everything shifted. Hannah cancelled their meeting. She didn't show up the next day either. On the third day, worry gnawed at Daniel's composure. He drove past the plaza twice, pretending it was coincidence, but his chest tightened with each empty bench. On the fourth day, he found her. She was sitting on the steps of a small community clinic, shoulders hunched, face pale. Her guitar case lay beside her, untouched. "Hannah," he said, approaching carefully. She looked up, startled, then relieved. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she admitted. "Like what?" "Fragile." The word landed heavily between them. She finally told him then. About the autoimmune condition that flared unpredictably. About the medications she couldn't always afford. About the fear of becoming dependent on anyone. About how singing was the one thing that made her feel whole when her body refused to cooperate. Daniel listened, heart pounding, a familiar helplessness resurfacing. This time, however, it didn't end in loss. It ended in choice. He reached for her hand, tentative, giving her space to pull away. She didn't. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm used to it." "Then let's get used to something else." If this story is touching something deep inside you, if it's reminding you of the quiet battles people fight every day, this is your invitation to be part of this community. Subscribe to the channel, not just for stories, but for the shared understanding that healing often begins when someone chooses to stay. Daniel didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since his mother's death, he wasn't afraid to face it. Because love, he was beginning to understand, doesn't arrive to erase pain. It arrives to sit beside it. The following week brought a storm unlike any Daniel had anticipated. Hannah had insisted they continue their routine, despite her weakness, but it was clear to anyone paying attention that her strength was fading. Daniel noticed the small details first. The way her fingers trembled slightly while tuning the guitar, how her steps lagged ever so subtly behind his, the faint colorlessness in her cheeks despite layers of sun-kissed makeup that could never truly mask exhaustion. One evening, as the golden glow of the plaza's lamplight stretched long shadows across the cobblestones, Hannah's knees buckled. She didn't cry out, didn't stumble dramatically. She simply sank onto the bench beside him, the guitar case slipping from her grasp. Daniel's heart lurched. "Hannah!" he shouted, kneeling beside her. The calm, quiet Hannah, who had carried the weight of her illness silently, now seemed impossibly fragile in front of him. Her eyes met his. A faint, reassuring smile tried to mask the fear behind them. "I'm fine," she whispered. But Daniel knew. He had learned through weeks of watching her carry herself with quiet grace that this was her way of asking for help. He lifted her into his arms without hesitation. Every ounce of professional restraint he had mastered over decades of high-stakes business evaporated. Nothing mattered now but the fragile life trembling against him. The hospital was a blur. Lights, faces, antiseptic, the smell of fear and hope mingled in the air. Daniel didn't let go of her hand, not once. Not even when a nurse insisted he leave, or when her doctor explained the severity of her autoimmune flare-up. She was stabilized, but the words life-threatening echoed relentlessly in his mind. Every statistic, every possible outcome that had been irrelevant in boardrooms now weighed on him like lead. Daniel stayed by her bedside long after visiting hours. He refused food, refused calls, refused to leave. All that mattered was her presence, even unconscious. He talked quietly to her, words spilling out that he had never dared to speak aloud before. "You don't have to carry this alone," he murmured again, as if repeating it could make it true. "I'm here. I'll always be here. God, we'll get through this." Hannah stirred slightly. Her fingers twitched, brushing against his hand. The faintest acknowledgement, but enough. Over the next days, he learned more about her battles than she had ever shared. Every medication, every side effect, every fleeting fear. And in turn, he shared pieces of himself he had hidden even from his closest friends. His loneliness, the weight of losing his mother, the emptiness behind his wealth. She listened. Not with pity, not with judgment, just presence. It was in these quiet, painful, honest moments that Daniel realized something essential. Faith isn't proven by comfort. It is forged in proximity to fragility, when love chooses to remain despite uncertainty. Then came the night when the crisis peaked. Hannah's temperature spiked, her pulse raced. Alarm sounded. Daniel held her hand, his knuckles white against hers, heart hammering, eyes locked on the machines, beeping a rhythm of life and warning. Doctors moved around him, urgent but composed. He barely noticed. Time had slowed to the heartbeat between them. Every second felt like eternity. And in the midst of fear, a strange clarity emerged. He prayed, not a rehearsed prayer, not one of polite tradition. He prayed in raw, unstructured words, pouring out desperation, hope, gratitude, and fear. He asked God not to take her, not because he believed he could bargain, but because he had finally understood the depth of human connection, how precious it was, how fleeting, how sacred. Hours passed, minutes stretched. The crisis ebbed slowly, and by dawn, Hannah's vitals stabilized. Daniel sat back in the chair beside her bed, exhausted, drained, but alive in a way he had never been before. The hospital lights flickered softly, as if in quiet approval. She opened her eyes. And there, in the sterile, humming stillness of the hospital room, their hands intertwined, Daniel saw a reflection of every choice that had led them here. The songs in the plaza, the shared silences, the small confessions, the unspoken trust. All the pain and uncertainty had crystallized into a singular truth. They were not alone. Hannah smiled weakly, her voice barely audible. I think I needed you more than I realized. And I needed you, he whispered, more than I could have imagined. It was in that moment that Daniel understood. Life had not prepared him for love, grief, or faith in a neatly packaged order. It had prepared him for Hannah, and sometimes that was more than enough. For anyone watching this story unfold, know this: moments of crisis reveal the true measure of human connection. Love is not perfect, faith is not effortless, and yet when you choose to stay, when you choose to believe, the impossible begins to feel within reach. If this story is resonating, if the quiet victories of courage, faith, and love strike something deep within, subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us how moments of fragility have changed your life. There is a community here that understands, a community that waits with open arms, ready to listen. The storm had passed. The night was quiet. And in the silence, Daniel and Hannah learned what it truly meant to survive, not just to endure, but to live together, despite everything. The days following Hannah's crisis were slow, deliberate, and fragile. Daniel remained by her side, but the hospital room no longer felt like a battlefield. It had become a sanctuary, a place where pain was acknowledged, but hope also breathed in the spaces between beeping machines and sterile walls. Hannah's recovery was gradual. Some mornings she awoke with strength, a faint warmth in her smile. Other days her body reminded her of its limits, and she leaned heavily on Daniel's arm as they navigated the quiet corridors. Each step, each small victory was celebrated in silence, as if any fanfare might shatter the delicate balance they were learning to live within. Daniel discovered a patience he never knew he possessed. He learned the rhythm of her breathing, the small shifts in her mood, the subtle changes that hinted at pain or fatigue. In caring for her, he uncovered the depth of love that exists not in grand gestures, but in quiet attentiveness, in showing up when no one else can, in holding a hand through moments too heavy to face alone. Hannah, in turn, began to trust again. Not blindly, not in the abstract. She trusted in the tangible, the unwavering presence of a man who had no reason to stay beyond the fleeting pull of sympathy or fleeting fascination. Daniel was there, day after day, and slowly her guarded heart softened, learning that love could coexist with fragility, that faith could be rebuilt, piece by piece, in human form. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden lines across the bedspread, Hannah picked up her guitar. Her hands were steady, guided by a mixture of determination and hope. Daniel watched, silent, heart tightening in anticipation. The first notes were tentative, almost shy, but as she played, a song emerged, a melody of survival, of quiet triumph, of shared resilience. Tears filled Daniel's eyes. He had witnessed the raw, unfiltered truth of her struggle, and in return received the gift of her voice, unbroken and alive. Every chord was a testament to endurance, every lyric an acknowledgement of the fragile beauty of life. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a sense of completion, not of life's answers, not of pain fully resolved, but of a moment fully lived. A moment where presence, love, and faith intersected with clarity and meaning. Days turned into weeks, and Hannah regained enough strength to leave the hospital. They returned to the plaza where it had all begun. The quiet oak tree, the worn benches, the gentle flow of life around them. Daniel and Hannah sat side by side, hands intertwined, smiles subtle but genuine. The weight of uncertainty replaced with a cautious hope. "I never thought I could feel this alive again," Daniel whispered. Hannah tilted her head toward him, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Neither did I. But maybe life doesn't prepare us for it. It surprises us instead." And in that shared laughter, that quiet acknowledgement of what had passed and what lay ahead, the truth became unmistakable. Love, faith, and human connection are never guaranteed, but they are always worth pursuing, always worth staying for. If this story has touched something within you, I invite you to become part of this community. Subscribe to the channel. Share your own moments of fragility and triumph in the comments. Tell us about the people, the places, or the music that helped you endure, that reminded you that even in the darkest valleys, hope can exist. Remember, it is in the small quiet acts of care, the moments of unwavering presence, and the courage to show up for one another that life finds its deepest meaning. And as Daniel and Hannah discovered, sometimes the greatest miracles are not found in grand gestures, but in the patient, steadfast love that quietly transforms everything. The plaza, once just a random corner of a bustling city, had become a testament to resilience. The songs that filled its air were no longer just melodies. They were the echoes of hearts willing to stay, willing to trust, willing to love despite everything. And as the sun set over San Antonio, painting the sky with the warmest shades of gold and rose, Daniel and Hannah sat together, silent yet fully present. The storm had passed. Faith had been renewed. Love had been reclaimed. And the story, their story, was just beginning. For everyone watching, know this: you are never alone in your journey. Your struggles, your doubts, your moments of despair, they are seen, they are valid, and they are part of a greater tapestry that can one day reveal a beauty you never imagined. Subscribe, share your experiences, and join this community of hearts that understand the power of staying, of believing, and of loving even when it feels impossible. Together, we bear witness to the quiet miracles that transform lives, one story at a time. Because in the end, it is not the absence of pain that defines us. It is the courage to endure, the willingness to trust, and the love we allow to blossom, even in the unlikeliest of places. And Daniel and Hannah had found that place and each other forever.